I just finished 1 month of training with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and in this video I'm going to share with you a little bit about my experience. I'm going to talk about why I got started, what my experience at my gym has been like, and whether or not I think it's worth it to keep going. So if you're interested or thinking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, maybe this video will help. My name is Steven, and I like to chat about topics around personal development. So if that's your thing, go ahead and please subscribe before I get started. First, here's a really quick summary of what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is. It's also known as Jujitsu or BJJ, and it's a form of martial art that focuses a lot more on grappling instead of punching and kicking. So it's very similar to wrestling, and the whole goal is to get your opponent to the ground and try to submit them, meaning you get them in like an arm lock, a foot lock, or a headlock, a choke, in a way that they have to tap out. So I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because life was just stressful and I needed a way to release that stress. But I didn't really like going to the gym because it was boring, and I didn't like other monotonous exercises like running or biking or swimming. I wanted something just a little more interesting. And so I looked into martial arts, and I'd done a little bit of martial arts growing up, but not all that much. And I wanted to look for something that was a bit practical. So that's where I landed on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm not sure how most Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms operate, so I can only speak to the one that I attended. And I'll tell you a little bit about what my very first day was like. When I got there, it was a class size of about 20 or 30, and we started off with some really light exercises and warm-ups, and then we did specific sparring techniques. So there would be a set of 3 different moves. They teach us one move, and then we pair up with a partner and practice that move on each other. They show us another move, and so on. And then at the very end, the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, we would do actual sparring, specifically trying to practice the moves that we learn. So it would be a round robin style where about half the class would be on the mat, and then another half would like line up, and then they'd go to each of those opponents, and you would spar with that opponent, and whoever won would stay on the mat, and then whoever lost would then go back into line. And it's kind of this round robin style. So we were sparring with different opponents throughout the whole thing. Now the moves in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are very complex. They're a series of steps that you have to kind of know and execute with somewhat precision. So even in practice, I found myself really struggling to remember what the steps were. And so when we got to sparring, I just completely forgot. I didn't know how to execute the steps, and most of my sparring was just trying to like hug the person or escape from them or squeeze them or try to do something. However, on the receiving end, it was a completely different experience because I was going up against opponents that knew the moves well. And so they were able to execute those moves on me, and they were effective because I found myself just trapped in positions that no matter how hard I struggled, I just couldn't get out of, and I had to tap out because of either the pain or the choking. So in short, these Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu moves worked, and they were extremely effective. So what drew me to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and what I thought made it unique was that it has a high emphasis on sparring. Now in other martial arts, there's more of a focus on learning specific routines and memorizing them. And there wasn't a lot of sparring. I took about a year of karate, and during that year, I remember only sparring like twice. And even in that sparring, no one practiced the moves that we learned. It was very just elementary kicking and punching, even at the higher belt levels. So at my gym, at every single training, we spar, and we spar with different opponents. So that gives me the opportunity to learn how to fight against different opponents of different sizes, different skill levels, different fighting styles. And what sparring does is it introduces resistance, meaning someone is actually trying to stop you from doing what you're doing to them. And so that's what drew me to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because a lot of other martial arts that I looked at didn't have that. Even high like intensity and aggressive martial arts like Krav Maga, which like looks super intense because they're doing all this combination of like really fast moves, but the thing is they don't actually practice that in sparring, and so you don't actually know if it's gonna work or not. Whereas Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the moves that you learn, you're practicing them against someone who's also trying to use those moves and different moves, and you're both using your force against each other, so you can really test it out. Like, does this move work? Is this move practical? Will it actually help defeat my opponent? So that's why I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is very practical for self-defense, because you're actually putting into practice what you learn. The sparring in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is very close to an actual combat scenario because you are using your full force against your opponent who's also doing the same thing to try to win that fight. So when you're pinned to the mat and there's a guy twice your size sitting on top of you, trying to strangle you, it is very much a realistic life and death scenario, and your adrenaline kicks in and you really know for sure whether or not you have the skills to get out of that situation. Another thing to note is that some gyms are gi and some gyms are no gi. And what that means is this is a gi. It's a traditional martial arts uniform used in a lot of different martial arts styles. And it's a very thick and durable fabric. And during training, at least at my gym, and during tournaments, this is all a part of the moves. And so a lot of the moves involve like grabbing the collar to choke or grabbing the sleeves, grabbing the pant sleeves and pulling. And so it's very useful in that sparring because this is a very tough material. So when you pull on it, you're actually pulling on the person. However, it may not be very practical in an actual like real life fight if you're ever to get into one because people may not have sleeves when they're fighting you and their clothes aren't as durable as this. And so if you just like pull on their collar, the shirt's just gonna rip. You know, it's not gonna do anything. And so some of those moves then aren't really effective in a real life scenario. So you can look into what your gym does and whether or not you want to go with a gym that trains with a gi in which their moves involve pulling on the gi, or no gi in which, you know, you're just kind of wrestling in exercise clothes, and so you're just mostly grabbing arms and legs and body parts rather than the actual uniform. So will I continue doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? For me, it's a yes. I really enjoy it. I like how physically intense it is. It's a great workout. It's a lot of fun. And should you start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Well, you have to ask yourself a few questions. If you want to get involved in an exercise that isn't as, you know, routine and repetitive, kind of like, you know, running, cycling, swimming, that kind of thing, or going to the gym, then this is definitely for you because it's very different. And especially if you're looking into martial arts. And if you're looking into martial art and you want something to be, you know, more practical and even like aggressive for like a self-defense, then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is for you. But with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and with a lot of other martial arts gyms, they all have some kind of free trial period. So it's a good idea to just try out a lot of different martial arts if you're not really sure which one. And even when you land on one, to try out a few different gyms. My gym offered a free, you know, three training sessions trial, so you could really see if you really liked it or not. And a lot of gyms will have very similar types of trial programs. So I hope my 1 month of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu experience was helpful for you in deciding whether or not you want to start. If you do end up starting, or if you go with a different martial art, I'd love to hear about it. Please share with me in the comments. And follow me, I'll definitely be posting future updates about how my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training is going, along with a lot of other things that I'm doing for personal development. My name is Steven, thanks so much for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe.